So my video output has been a little slow lately. I'm not exactly sure why. Part of the reason, I think I've already done a video on 3 days of Gettysburg, which I've got on the table now, which is what you're looking at. It's sort of been occupying my time, but it's been slow going because I haven't really had a lot of time, at least a lot of days in a row that I've focused on it. I keep stepping away and coming back to it. Back in early August, I had Gen Con, and I was sick for a period after that. Usually, after Gen Con, my gaming enthusiasm ramps way up, and I'm playing a lot more stuff. This year, sort of the opposite happened. I went to Gen Con, got interested in playing a bunch of games, then got sick, and that sort of killed everything for a couple of weeks after, through the middle of August, and then have been gone just about every weekend since late August, with just a respite here or there on weekends. And part of it also, I had the where is it up there? Gallipoli 1915 set up, and I played the intro to that and realized I didn't video any of that. Usually I video stuff when I'm trying out something new, or when I'm focused on something interesting, or when something's taking up a particular amount of table space. And Gallipoli I had set up for a while, at least a month, where I was kind of daunted by the rule set for it. It's not. It's hard to describe. It's one of those games where the subject is very interesting. I mean, I absolutely wanted a monster treatment of the Gallipoli campaign. But once I got into the rule set, realized, wow, there's a lot of different stuff here. It's different than all the concepts in it were different than anything I'd sort of dealt with before. And so, it's not something you could just sort of easily slot into. It's not something that had a lot of recognizable combat elements to it. Like say here, for example, where I'm playing 3 days of Gettysburg, which is Great Battles of the American Civil War. There's certain things that you understand and expect with a tactical Civil War game. You have your regimental units, you have facings, you have formations, you have different movements for those formations, you have different combat chart elements that come into play. For something like Great Battles of the American Civil War, you've got different types of rifles, you've got different types of cannon, you have those kind of elements that come into play that add a little bit of chrome to the CRT. Something like Line of Battle, the Gamers Tactical Civil War series, has eliminated a lot of those individual weapon-specific things, which creates a very streamlined CRT. But all the stuff is still the same there. You've still got these regimental units. You've still got their movement, their facing, their formation, etc., etc. The Gallipoli game just didn't have any of that. It just felt like totally new territory for me, where you're dealing with different size units. This whole concept of bridgements, where the designer has said, there's brigades and regiments, and they're going to be interchangeable because there's so many permutations of those two things within the order of battle for this particular campaign. And so it creates this shorthand to describe what you're playing with on the map. The combat chart feels like a complex CRT. It's still a typical CRT, but feels more complicated than most of the systems that I played recently, which have tried to sort of abstract more complex things out to make a more streamlined CRT that doesn't deal with percentages or things like that. And the terrain and everything, there's just so many special rules for that very unique Gallipoli terrain, which is very little in the way of trees or vegetation, but very much considers slight elevation changes and things like that, to the point where you can occupy the same hex, and there's this whole us versus them concept when you have units occupying the same hex, but that are in essentially close combat quarters in the same hex, but can occupy that status for turn after turn. So just a lot of different concepts and stuff in there. So amazingly, I'm describing Gallipoli while you're focused on a view of 3 Days of Gettysburg. Just sort of again explaining why I didn't do a video on that. I don't know why. because I was too overwhelmed by it, and had already cleaned it up. Now on the other table over there is Gloomhaven, just because I had a game night scheduled with friends and needed the table, and that was where Gallipoli had been set up. I only had the intro scenario set up on it and had played through it, so I was able to take it down, but it was before I was able to do any video. So that's just sort of an explanation as to where I've been. I have 3 Days of Gettysburg set up. The other thing I got is sitting over here, and this is, you can see it upside down in the box there. This is Stalingrad down in the Volga, which I'd watched Stuka Joe's videos on it, and it intrigued me enough, and I had started reading David Glance's Stalingrad books. It's a trilogy, although there's technically 4 books because the 3rd book is split into 2 parts. So I started reading that and was looking for a good Stalingrad game. This essentially is a Stalingrad Verdun in the Volga is essentially a reinterpretation of the old Avalon Hill Turning Point Stalingrad game, which is a little hard to find, a little pricey these days. It's probably in the $80 range if you're looking for a decent copy of Avalon Hill's Turning Point Stalingrad. So I had been interested in that, watched Stuka Joe's videos, and realized, yeah, this looks like a good treatment at the level of detail that I'm interested in for Stalingrad. Not something crazy like Streets of Stalingrad, but not something that's super light either. I'm thinking of like the recent Vento Nuovo Stalingrad Inferno in the Volga, which is like a block game treatment of Stalingrad. It's fairly light. This is something a little heavier, a little more historical order of battle, a little more historical focus on it. So just kind of breaking into this, and we'll probably do video on it at some point, but haven't cracked into it enough yet to do video. Where when I do video, I like to at least show some kind of progress on what I'm working on, and this is just still in setup phase. So, but that is what's sort of going on the tables. Again, that table is Gloomhaven, so nothing to talk about over there. For 3 Days of Gettysburg, the last time I was looking at this, it was still pretty early on the July 2nd, and I'm doing the July 2nd scenario, which is the second day of Gettysburg. I'm up to the 1 p.m. turn, and as you can see here, we're looking at Culp's Hill in the immediate foreground, with Cemetery Hill there over on the left. And you can see the situation has not really changed since my last video. The problem being, and you can see the Confederates have tried to kind of swing around that Union right, but this terrain, particularly for units that are in attack formation, this terrain is just terrible. Rough woods are, per the CRT, they cost 3 movements. So when you're in attack formation, or in your attack orders, which most of Ewell's 2nd Corps here, which is Early's division and Johnson's division, they are in attack orders to try and push these Union troops here. When you're in attack orders, your movement is halved, and infantry unit movement is 6 in this. So they're halved to 3. Moving through rough woods, which is what, aside from just a few hexes here, this is all rough woods. It's all 3 movement hexes, 3 movement points. So units moving into this, they can move 1 hex and they can attack, but just getting up to, this is all like rough in here, so just getting up to a point where they can actually attack or assault the Union lines takes forever. And doubling that, they have to make a morale check every time they move into those rough woods hexes to see if they become disordered or not. Now, you don't want to, if a couple of guys fail their rolls along here and get up adjacent, you don't want to be doing shot combat when you're disordered. I mean, you can in a pinch if you need to, but it's a -1 DRM, which will start to have an effect when you're attacking units that are also in rough terrain or potentially up steep slopes, which is certainly for the peak of the crown of Culp's Hill here. These guys are up steep slopes. You're getting into like -4, -5 plus shot combat modifiers for units that are in this rough woods or up steep slope terrain. So what I've learned is, and which is what can happen historically, Culp's Hill is impossible to take through a frontal assault, even against shot up units like the 1st Corps, which you can see here now. I've got all 12th Corps units on Culp's Hill. When this scenario starts, the second day scenario starts, you're dealing with a lot of shot up and collapsed 1st Corps, like Iron Brigade regiments and other 1st Corps regiments that are up here occupying Culp's Hill. That was one reason why I pressed so hard with Early and Johnson to get up to Culp's Hill and try and attack it, because I knew these weakened Union units were up here, and that would be probably my best chance before the 12th Corps or potentially other corps, 5th Corps, for example, were able to move into this terrain and relieve these beleaguered 1st Corps troops, which you can see have kind of shifted all over here now into the Cemetery Hill area. It didn't work, as you can see, because the 12th Corps is obviously there and the Confederates are sitting outside of it. It was just too difficult for the Confederates to move quickly up there and to try and hit things before the Union troops were able to kind of swap out a lot of these units. So what I've ended up with now is a strong Union position along here, and some of the Union units are not great morale-wise. There's some 5s and stuff in there. But when they're on good terrain, it's still very difficult for the Confederates to exploit that. So, by 1 p.m., all these Confederate units have all backed off. You can see I've got some Confederate units that have pushed up to the Union line here. I had a guy that was there. He just got pushed back. You can see he's ammo depleted. A lot of these guys are out of command, collapsed, ammo depleted, etc. It's been very taxing on the Confederate troops, particularly over here on Early's assault on the peak of Culp's Hill. Got several collapsed regiments here, which are regiments that have lost more than half of their strength. They're not going to be able to regain that until you have a night turn, so it's outside the scope of this scenario. So this scenario for second day is a one shot and done kind of thing. So the Confederate assault on Culp's Hill has essentially stalled. At this point, all of Lee's hopes are in Longstreet's potential assault, which you can see here. Longstreet is underway. All these units all the way back down the Chambersburg Pike, doing a long, slow march to get over to the Union flank, which historically was out here at the Peach Orchard, where Sickles, and it would have been along this salient here, where Sickles' 3rd Corps was. I've gone with the historic. Get away from the glare here. I've gone with the non-historic version of Sickles' Corps taking his historic position, which should have been all the way up to Little Round Top, which is this line here, all along Little Round Top. 2nd Corps has come up here and filled in a bit larger than their historic line along Cemetery Ridge. 11th Corps is the brown, 1st Corps is the yellow, 2nd Corps is the red, 3rd Corps is the green here. This lighter green is the artillery reserve, which is going to be dispersed all along the Cemetery Ridge line. These orange guys here, this is all 5th Corps. realizing that 12th Corps, the blue units here, had Culp's Hill in hand as 5th Corps came on to this point down here, space 10. I just marched them along the road here and sent them immediately around to the left, where they're going to be there in a reserve capacity or a flank capacity to deal with Longstreet's potential attack on the Union left here. At this point, looking at it, with two strong Union Corps, two full-strength Union Corps here on Little Round Top in this Union left position, Longstreet might want to focus his attack on the somewhat thinner stretched 2nd Corps here. So we'll see where Longstreet focuses his attack in the afternoon of July 2nd. The way it is now, again, this is bad terrain here, just like Culp's Hill is on the Union right. Bad terrain to try and effectuate a frontal assault, especially with not much in the way of support that Longstreet's going to have. So, this is one of those where, without Sickles being forced into his historical deployment, which gave the Confederates a fighting chance because they had a Union Corps that was in a position to be smashed and then pushed through to a thinner, potentially weaker Union reserve position. Now you've got Sickles in a strong defensive position with a strong reserve, and the 2nd Corps with still potential reserves from the 6th Corps, which is not on the map yet, as they come in. They'll be coming in from the same position here that the 5th Corps came in from. They'll be coming in later in the afternoon of the 2nd and could potentially be thrown in should Longstreet, puncture any points of the 2nd Corps line. So it's a tough row to hoe for the Confederates on day 2 if you don't have those historical factors for Sickles' deployment, which I don't here. I could have done it. I could have said, let's move Sickles out to where he was historically and see what happens. Let's see what happens if he doesn't move out historically, which, just judging by what I've seen so far on Culp's Hill and how the game functions. And I did do some assaults too on Cemetery Ridge because 11th Corps here is particularly weak. They're low morale units. They're not. Some of them have already been shot up from the first day losses. So this is a particularly weak. Also, at the start of this particular scenario on day 2, this is a particularly weak position for the Union. I came up and hit with Dole's brigade, and you can see there's a replacement there. He got killed in the assault. But Dole's and Ramser's brigades assaulted the Cemetery Hill position and actually pushed. You can see there's some exposed breastworks here. They pushed the Union line back. The 11th Corps kind of retreated and got some cascading retreat results. You can't pass through in GBACW rules for retreats. You have to displace. So they displaced a lot of the 11th Corps line. You got some more collapsed regiments and stuff. So there's some dicey moments there for the Union 11th Corps. But their artillery emplacements on the hill ended up counterattacking the following turn and just completely annihilated Dole's and Ramser's assaults on Cemetery Hill and their initial successes there. So there was an attempt to take Cemetery Hill that looked promising, but ultimately failed under heavy artillery return fire, which is how Cemetery Hill worked. It was Cemetery Hill described as an artillerist's dream position. It's essentially a plateaued hill, a flat-topped hill where you can just put battery after battery, and units would have to, once they get up the slope of the hill, then they have to contend with a lot of cannon right in their face. So it is a difficult position to assault. If the troops there are not great, like the 11th Corps were, you've got a good chance to get breakthroughs, but if you can't sustain it, you're going to get hit back hard, and that's what happened. So the Confederates had some good chances early on July 2nd at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, but couldn't capitalize there. Now it's going to come down to Longstreet to see what he can do. If at the point Longstreet assaults the Union position here, I may try and reinvigorate the assaults over here to try and stretch the Union line, particularly if the Union's in a position where they have to disperse reserves. But just from what I know of terrain here and what Longstreet actually can bring to an assault, which is not insignificant, but I think he's not going to have enough support to seriously threaten the extreme Union left, maybe enough to threaten the Union center, but then I can start shifting troops from the Union left to support the Union center or bring 6th Corps in, which again, the biggest Union Corps, not even on the map yet. So it's questionable to see what the Confederates will be able to do with a serious Union defense on the second day from the start, as opposed to the ad hoc, throw reserves in as they come onto the field situation to try and stem the Confederate tide that Meade dealt with historically. So anyway, that's where my game of Three Dog is at currently. It's awaiting Longstreet to get in position and try and do something creative. We will see how it turns out.